The Chaco Canyon Enigma, right? Picture this, you're a seasoned archaeologist who's seen it all. Yeah, ancient tombs, forgotten cities, the whole shebang. But then you rock up to Chaco Canyon, and suddenly you're bawling like a proper baby. Mental, isn't it? But here's the thing, even the toughest archaeologists get absolutely flummoxed by this place. And once you hear what I'm about to tell you, you'll understand why this ancient mystery has been doing everyone's head in for decades. So, what's all the fuss about then? Well, imagine stumbling across the most spectacular ruins you've ever clapped eyes on, right in the middle of absolutely nowhere. We're talking about structures so impressive they'd make modern architects weep with envy. Built by people who supposedly had nothing. No wheels, no written language, not even pack animals. Sounds barmy, doesn't it? But that's just the tip of the iceberg, mate. Chaco Canyon wasn't just some random settlement that got a bit carried away with itself. Oh no, this was the absolute epicenter of North American civilization during the pre-Columbian era. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of London or New York. The place where everything happened, where all the important decisions were made, and where culture and commerce flourished like nowhere else on the continent. The influence of Chacoan culture spread far and wide. You can still see their architectural fingerprints all over neighboring ruins today. Now, when you first glimpse these ruins, your brain tries to make sense of what you're seeing. Massive, great houses stretching across the landscape. Palatial structures that would put some modern buildings to shame. These were unto your average ancient dwellings we were talking about. Colossal monuments featuring hundreds upon hundreds of rooms. The crown jewel, Pueblo Bonito, boasted nearly 1,000 rooms. 1,000. Can you imagine? That's more rooms than most luxury hotels today. But here's where things start getting proper weird. And I mean absolutely bonkers. You'd expect a place this massive, with all these enormous, great houses, to have been absolutely heaving with people. Wouldn't you? Bustling markets, crowded streets, the works. But archaeological evidence tells a completely different story. And it's one that'll make your head spin. Current estimates reckon that Chaco Canyon's entire population was around 2,000 people. 2,000 for a place this enormous. That's practically deserted. It's like building Wembley Stadium for a Sunday league match, which immediately begs the question that has been plaguing researchers for decades. Where on earth did they get the manpower to build this absolutely massive city? And more importantly, who was it all built for if there were enough people to actually live in the bloody thing? But wait, it gets even more bizarre. The location itself is completely mental when you think about it logically. Chaco Canyon sits smack dab in the middle of what can only be described as a proper wasteland, a barren, uninhabitable desert with weather that'd make you want to pack up and leave within a day. There's no river running through it, hardly any trees to speak of, and the climate is about as welcoming as a bouncer at a posh club. Get this though, the 250,000 trees used to construct these great houses. Every single one had to be carried in on foot from other locations. 250,000 trees, mate. That's an absolutely staggering number when you consider they had to hoof it across the desert, probably under scorching sun, with no wheels or pack animals to help them out. It is like deciding to build a mansion in the Sahara and then walking to Scotland to fetch all your building materials. This brings up another head-scratcher that's been driving archaeologists absolutely mental. Why Chaco Canyon? Why would anyone in their right mind choose to build such a magnificent city in such a godforsaken location with virtually no natural resources? It's like choosing to open a beach resort in Antarctica. And here, the absolute kicker, that LL really blow your mind. after spending roughly 300 years building this incredible capital city, working generation after generation to create something truly spectacular. The Chacoons just ... left. One day they were there. The next day, they'd packed up their bits and bobs and vanished into thin air. They never built anything remotely similar ever again. Just abandoned the whole project and disappeared like they'd never existed. Chaco Canyon was undoubtedly the beating heart of one of the most sophisticated and advanced cultures in ancient North America. And even now, looking at what remains, you can see why. The sheer scale and complexity of what they achieved is absolutely mind-blowing. But it is also deeply puzzling in ways that make even the brightest minds scratch their heads in bewilderment. The archaeological evidence suggests the Chacoons had an incredibly complex culture, much of which remains completely beyond modern understanding. It is like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle when half the pieces are missing and the other half are from different boxes entirely. As we delve deeper into this mystery, we'll be exploring various aspects of their culture, from their mind-bending social organization to their completely perplexing governance system, right through to some rather macabre religious practices that'll make your skin crawl. But for now, let us focus on the one thing that absolutely everyone notices first when they visit Chaco Canyon: the architecture. And blimey, what architecture it is. 15 great houses. That the Chaco Canyon landscape. But if we're being honest, Pueblo Bonito absolutely steals the show. This palatial masterpiece is the belle of the ball, the crown jewel that makes all the others pale in comparison. Even by today's standards, this ancient skyscraper is something to behold. The building sprawls across 3 acres of land. That is, roughly 2.5 football pitches with walls that are up to 3 feet thick. These weren't flimsy structures thrown up in a weekend. These were built to last for millennia. Archaeologists reckon this building probably stretched up to 4 or 5 stories high, with over 800 rooms that could comfortably house up to 1,000 residents. That's more accommodation than most modern apartment complexes. What makes this even more remarkable is how unique it was for its time. Most ancient builders would start small and add more floors as time went on, like adding extensions to your house when the family grows. But the Chacoons, they planned these great houses to be proper skyscrapers right from the get-go. They were messing about with gradual expansion. They went straight for the jugular and built upwards from day one. The masonry techniques they used were absolutely revolutionary for their time. These weren't methods that had been passed down through generations or borrowed from neighboring cultures. The Chacoons developed completely new building techniques that were so impressive, surrounding cities started copying them. You can still see the influence of Chacon architecture in ruins throughout the region, like a signature style that spread far and wide. Many of these great houses took decades, sometimes even centuries, to complete. Pueblo Bonito, for instance, took about 300 years to finish. 300 years. That's longer than the United States has existed as a country, which immediately raises some absolutely mind-boggling questions that'll make your brain hurt just thinking about them. The Chacoons didn't leave behind any written records. In fact, there's absolutely no evidence they even had a written language. So how on earth were the original architects able to pass down their building plans through multiple generations and still end up with structures this sophisticated and accurate? It's like playing the world's longest game of Chinese whispers. Except instead of the message getting garbled, it somehow became more complex and precise with each telling. Take Pueblo Bonito as a perfect example. This building forms the shape of a perfect semicircle and has at its very center a precise north-south line that splits the central courtyard into 2 equal halves. The level of precision involved in achieving this without any written plans or modern surveying equipment is absolutely staggering. But it doesn't stop there. Pueblo Bonito and other great houses like Casa Rinconada, Chetroqueta, and Penasco Blanco featured sophisticated astronomical markers, water control systems, and communication features that would be impressive even by today's standards. The mere fact that some of these buildings rose as high as 4 to 5 stories without suffering any structural failure until they were abandoned is a proper feat of engineering, especially when you consider they had no written blueprints whatsoever. How did this ancient culture achieve such precision and sophistication? And returning to our earlier question, where did they get the labor force for such a gargantuan project? Building Pueblo Bonito and 14 other great houses, not to mention hundreds of smaller dwellings called unit pueblos scattered throughout the area, isn't exactly a weekend DIY project. Even with 300 years to complete the work, a total population of 2,000 people, of which the actual labor force would only be a fraction, simply is beyond enough to achieve the sheer scale and complexity we see at Chaco Canyon. They would have needed thousands upon thousands of workers, plus a highly efficient and incredibly complex leadership structure to organize numerous work parties around core operations like logistics, construction, trade, food, distribution, water management, and shelter provision. Think about it for a moment. No mobile phones, no written language, not even basic wheeled transport. And yet somehow such a massive labor force was organized and coordinated to build one of the wonders of the ancient world across multiple generations. It should have been an absolutely impossible feat. Yet, there it stands. This brings us back to the question of resources, and this is where things get even more mental. Remember those 250,000 trees we mentioned earlier? Only a tiny fraction came from the immediate local area. Chaco Canyon was so barren and desolate that there were hardly any trees worth mentioning. And even the few trees that did grow there weren't sturdy enough for construction purposes. So the Chacons had to travel up to 50 miles on foot to regions like Chusca, Zuni, and Mount Tela to import timber. 50 miles. That's like walking from London to Brighton, except you're carrying massive tree trunks on your back through desert terrain. And remember, they imported all 250,000 trees this way on foot, with no wheels, no pack animals, nothing but human muscle and determination. But here's where it gets even stranger. And this is the bit that really does archaeologists' heads in. When you examine the great houses closely, you don't find many fire pits, sleeping areas, or other sections typically used for everyday household activities that you'd expect to find in normal residential dwellings. Instead, Chaco Canyon is absolutely packed with what are called kiva. A kiva is a kind of ceremonial pit used for religious ceremonies. And when I say Chaco Canyon has lots of kivas, I mean it has an absolutely bonkers number of them. Pueblo Bonito alone has 40 kivas, which works out to 1 kiva for every 29 rooms, or roughly 1 kiva for every 2 residents. That is an absolutely mental ratio that suggests these buildings were primarily built for people to live in. And the strangeness doesn't stop there, because we haven't even mentioned the roads yet. How do we explain the presence of over 800 miles of well-engineered roads throughout the Chaco Canyon system? We're talking about a sophisticated network of thoroughfares, some connecting the great houses, others ending abruptly and leading absolutely nowhere like ancient roads to nowhere. What makes these roads even more curious is that this region of North America didn't have the wheel yet. There's no evidence whatsoever that the Chacons used carts, wagons, or any other form of wheeled transport. So why construct such an elaborate road system just for walking? It seems completely barmy, but the engineering details make it even more puzzling. The main roads are about 33 feet wide, while secondary roads are roughly half that width. Now, This might not sound unusual, until you remember that Chaco Canyon had no vehicles whatsoever. Even if these roads were built purely for pedestrian traffic, why make them this wide? You could march an entire army down these roads with room to spare. But here's the really mental part. These roads are ridiculously straight, and they never once avoid any obstacles. If the road encountered a cliff face, the builders constructed elaborate stairways and kept going. If it met a mountain, they went straight over the top and continued the road on the other side. The engineering determination involved is absolutely staggering. The road builders might not have avoided physical obstacles, but they did avoid one thing with religious dedication: gentle curves. All Chaco roads are laser straight with sharp, angular turns. Even when roads needed to branch off to different locations, they maintained this rigid geometry. It is like the builders were using a giant ruler to draw lines across the landscape, and refused to deviate even slightly. The reason all of this is so mind-blowing, even for modern archaeologists with all our advanced technology and construction knowledge, is because similar projects are almost impossible to complete in today's world. Even large-scale projects undertaken by billionaires with unlimited resources still end up being abandoned or going massively over budget and behind schedule. When you put all this in perspective, it raises absolutely mind-boggling questions about how a civilization with significantly fewer resources than we have today managed to complete a 300-year construction project that honored the original design specifications as if they had detailed blueprints stored in some ancient filing cabinet. And if all that wasn't puzzling enough, Chaco Canyon shows absolutely no signs of any defensive systems whatsoever, despite the place being absolutely loaded with incredible wealth. The Chacuns accumulated riches on an unprecedented scale that would make modern billionaires jealous. For instance, Pueblo Bonito had an entire room dedicated exclusively to scarlet macaw. If you know anything about exotic birds, you'll know that scarlet macaws are notoriously expensive to acquire and maintain, both today and historically. Back then, these brilliant red birds were considered ultimate status symbols and markers of serious political clout. From hundreds of thousands of turquoise beads to shell beads, jet beads, and copper bells. They even found evidence of chocolate. These people were absolutely loaded, but they must have been something far more powerful than merely wealthy. because they had absolutely no security systems in place to protect their valuables. Even more head-scratching is the fact that when the Chakuns abruptly abandoned their city, they didn't bother taking all their precious artifacts with them. Were they so ridiculously wealthy that they could afford to leave massive amounts of treasure behind after gathering only their most precious items? Or did something far more sinister happen that forced them to flee without their possessions? Before we dive into the various theories surrounding the Chakuns and their mysterious disappearance, there's one more absolutely remarkable aspect we need to discuss. Their incredible astronomical knowledge, developed centuries before telescopes were even dreamt of. Archaeologists have discovered that the walls of the great houses in Chaco Canyon were built according to precise astronomical observations. Chetroquetl and Pueblo Bonito, for example, are perfectly oriented to face the exact directions of the rising and setting moon. During specific lunar events, when the moon reaches its lunar standstill, which happens every 18.6 years, this rare phenomenon is perfectly framed by the building's doorways and windows. It's like having a massive astronomical observatory built into the architecture itself. Not only that, but 12 of the great houses align precisely with solar equinox and solstice cycles as well. The sheer scale and accuracy of these alignments are absolutely insane when you consider the technology available at the time. Modern astronomers believe there must have been sophisticated intergenerational astronomical knowledge involved, passed down through generations with incredible precision. But how did a culture without any written language develop and preserve such complex astronomical concepts that still baffle most modern people today? And even more perplexingly, what made them abandon their magnificent capital city with its elegant buildings and impressive network of expertly constructed roads so suddenly and completely? Why did they never attempt to build anything remotely similar ever again? Multiple theories abound, and some of them are absolutely fascinating, while others are genuinely blood-curdling. When we talk about the Chakuns who built and inhabited Chaco Canyon, we're specifically referring to the ancestral Pueblones, formerly known as the Enos, though their descendants now prefer the more respectful term ancestral Pueblones when referring to their ancestors. The stories about the ancestral Pueblones and their time in Chaco Canyon range from quite fascinating to absolutely gruesome. We read talking tales as horrifying as ritual cannibalism, with evidence gathered directly from the archaeological site itself. Yet to this day, experts remain divided about which of the popular theories actually explains what happened. But let's start from the beginning, shall we? As you can probably tell just by looking at the Hopi people who descended from them, the ancestral Pueblones were an incredibly spiritual and religious people. Their mythology speaks of gods who ascended through an underground portal known as this and taught them skills in a wide range of crafts, including advanced masonry techniques, pottery making, archery, and sophisticated agricultural methods. For most of their early history, the ancestral Pueblones lived in large underground dwellings and primarily made baskets rather than pottery. But then, around 750 CE, something remarkable happened. They suddenly started building elaborate cities above ground using stone and absolutely revolutionary masonry techniques that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. According to certain sources, it was these gods who passed down this advanced knowledge to the ancestral, and this might remind you of another famous legend, the Anunnaki and the Sumerians. In case you're not familiar with this connection, the Sumerian civilization was basically the ancient equivalent of today's Silicon Valley. The fundamental principles of agriculture, architecture, mathematics, and even writing systems were all supposedly handed down to humanity by the Sumerians, who interestingly also managed to create an incredibly advanced civilization despite having access to very few natural resources until divine knowledge showed them how to make something extraordinary out of practically nothing. This bears a striking resemblance to what we know about the Shah, which has led some researchers to theorize that the gods of the ancestral Pueblones were actually the same Anunnaki mentioned in Sumerian texts. According to this school of thought, the Anunnaki fled to the Americas after the fall of Sumerian civilization. Now, you can make of that theory what you will. We won't be tumbling down that particular rabbit hole today, but it is worth pointing out that South Americans and the ancestral Pueblones all share remarkably similar mythologies involving certain themes that also appear in Sumerian accounts of the A particularly obvious example would be the Ant people, that the Hopi claim saved them from global catastrophes on 2 separate occasions and provided them with advanced skills and technology. In the Hopi language, Anu means ant, and Nuki means friend. So, Anunnaki to the Hopi would literally translate to ant friends. This linguistic connection has led some theorists to suggest that perhaps the Ant people the Hopi say helped their ancestral Puebloan ancestors were actually the same Anunnaki described in ancient Mesopotamian texts. Again, you can interpret that however you'd like. For now though, let's return to our main investigation. So far, we've established a theory that the ancestral Pueblones probably learned the sophisticated skills they used to build the majestic Chaco Canyon from divine teachers. Whether you want to call them God's Ant people or Anunnaki is entirely up to you. But think about it logically. There is absolutely no practical reason why anyone would choose to erect such magnificent structures in the middle of a barren, barely habitable desert. But what if habitability wasn't the point? What if they believed the land itself was sacred? During that era, lands were often considered sacred if people believed that gods had landed there or made contact with humans in that specific location. So perhaps this was precisely the case with Chaco Canyon. They believed their gods had touched down in that particular valley when they first arrived on Earth, making it the most sacred location imaginable. If that were true, then building a massive capital-like city to honor and commemorate that divine visitation would make perfect sense, wouldn't it? The enormous investment in time, resources, and labor would be completely justified if they viewed it as a sacred obligation. But how do we explain the specific design and structure of the buildings? Once again, this might be resolvable by approaching it from a religious angle. The ancestral Pueblones, just like their Mesoamerican and South American cousins, had deeply embedded in their religious mythology legends of white-bearded people who came to them from the heavens, taught them advanced knowledge and skills, and then promised to return at some point in the future. For the ancestral Pueblones, this legend is captured in the myth of the Pahana, or the lost white brother, whom the Hopi people are still expecting to return and usher in a new age of peace and prosperity on Earth. Now, before anyone gets the wrong idea and starts leaving inappropriate comments, let me be absolutely clear. The concept of the Pahana, or lost white brother, was an integral part of ancestral Puebloan culture and religious belief system. It definitely wasn't about race or ethnicity in any modern sense, so please don't try to make it something it's not. According to their ancient myths and prophecies, the lost white brother will arrive from the east, which is precisely why Hopi people traditionally bury their deceased facing eastward, towards the direction from which their prophesied savior will return. Could this also explain why their ancestors were so obsessed with astronomical phenomena and celestial alignments? Quite possibly. If the ancestral Pueblones were eagerly anticipating the return of divine beings, it would make perfect sense that they want to be prepared to recognize the signs of their arrival. And if the ancestral Pueblones were genuinely looking forward to welcoming back their gods, then it becomes much more understandable why they were willing to go through such extreme measures to build such a majestic temple palace complex. They obviously had more pressing daily concerns, like growing the food they needed to survive, but they invested enormous amounts of time, energy, and resources building a massive sacred city where only a small number of people actually lived. A sacred spiritual obligation makes the most logical sense as the driving force behind this kind of extraordinary undertaking. Right. Now let's talk about the ancestral Pueblones' sudden and mysterious disappearance. And this is where things start to get genuinely dark and disturbing. So you might want to brace yourself. The sudden collapse of Chaco Canyon, while mysterious and puzzling, isn't actually the first event of its kind in ancient history. About 300 years before Chaco fell, a remarkably similar fate befell the Maya civilization. The Maya also suddenly collapsed in a way that has completely defied explanation for centuries, leaving behind magnificent ruins and absolutely no clear indication of what caused their downfall. But here is a much darker parallel that might make your skin crawl, depending on how much you know about ancient cultures. You're probably already aware that Maya civilization appears to have practiced cannibalism, perhaps as part of elaborate religious rituals and ceremonies. Well, as it turns out, the Chacuns may have done exactly the same thing. At least, that's what certain archaeological evidence suggests. Though there's still considerable disagreement among scholars about the interpretation of these findings. According to some rather disturbing sources, the Anasazi were indeed a very powerful civilization, but they were also allegedly quite wicked and ruthless. It is claimed that the Anasazi worshipped dark forces and were notorious for operating a massively profitable slave trade where they subjected conquered rivals to some of the most cruel and unusual forms of torture ever devised by human beings in order to enforce absolute obedience and prevent rebellion. The Anasazi were also supposedly known to routinely carry out human sacrifices in their sacred kiva. And yes, according to these accounts, the religious rituals did involve ritualistic cannibalism. Obviously, if these claims are true, the Anasazi would have been an extremely ruthless and powerful people with the organizational capability to structure their society at highly complex levels. This would certainly explain how they were able to force enslaved populations to construct all the massive structures we see throughout Chaco Canyon. The incredible diversity of construction techniques reflected in the various buildings could be proof of this theory. Different enslaved groups bringing their own architectural knowledge and building methods to the project. According to proponents of this rather grim theory, the beginning of the end for the Anasazi started when they began to turn against and mock the holy men, powerful shamans, who were highly revered and respected throughout Chaconne society. Those who subscribe to this interpretation claim that the Anasazi became extremely arrogant and began ridiculing these spiritual leaders. So one day, the holy men decided they had quite enough and punished the Anasazi by calling down divine retribution to destroy their land and civilization. The punishment supposedly came in the form of powerful supernatural winds that blew through the canyon and caused Chaco Canyon to collapse in on itself through some form of divine intervention. When this catastrophe occurred, the enslaved populations saw it as their golden opportunity to rebel against their cruel masters. So they systematically destroyed what remained of Chaco Canyon and then fled the area, never to return or rebuild. The question is, does this rather dramatic theory actually line up with the physical evidence discovered at Chaco Canyon? Well, you could argue that it does. There are definitely some intriguing clues that archaeologists have uncovered that might support elements of this explanation. For instance, archaeologists have noted that the wooden timbers used to construct the roofs of the kivas were each deliberately and individually removed, suggesting intentional human action rather than natural decay or collapse. Additionally, entrances to many kivas were systematically boarded up, and the kivas themselves show clear signs of fire damage, suggesting there was probably some form of violent uprising or revolt that led to the systematic destruction of these sacred spaces. When you think about it from a logical standpoint, it does make a certain amount of sense. If people had been enslaved and forced to engage in this absolutely Herculean undertaking to build massive projects that provided them with no benefit whatsoever, while simultaneously being given inadequate food and water, and having to watch as their loved ones were ritually murdered and consumed, then of course they would immediately seize any opportunity to retaliate against their oppressive overlords and escape to freedom. It really was only a matter of time before such a system would collapse under its own cruelty, wasn't it? Well, that's just one theory. And there's another equally bloody interpretation that paints a completely different picture. Only this time the ancestral Pueblones are portrayed as the victims rather than the perpetrators. According to supporters of this alternative theory, before the Anasazi made their home in the protective isolation of Chaco Canyon, they were actually victims of constant raids and attacks from a band of vicious marauders known as the These Toltecs were allegedly ritual cannibals who had been systematically oppressing and terrorizing the Anasazi for decades, until the Anasazi finally managed to escape to the remote location of Chaco Canyon. This claim might actually be supported by hard archaeological evidence. Some researchers believe that the fact that Chaco Canyon was built so far away from reliable water sources and high up in the mountains suggests that the Chacones were deliberately trying to hide from dangerous enemies. They theorized that the great houses weren't actually built primarily for comfortable habitation, but rather as massive defensive structures designed to intimidate potential invaders and provide protection during times of conflict. This would certainly explain why barely 60 people actually resided in Pueblo Bonito, despite it having nearly 1,000 rooms. If Chaco Canyon was constructed primarily as a defensive stronghold, then perhaps the hundreds of empty rooms in the great houses were unbuilt for people to live in, but rather to make the buildings appear larger and more imposing, thereby intimidating potential attackers into staying away. As for how the ancestral Pueblones ultimately disappeared, the Hopi people have their own traditional explanation. They believe their ancestors were simply called away by spiritual forces. In other words, when the time came, they just packed up and left in response to divine guidance. Now, there is obviously the question of how the Anasazi could have produced descendants if they were all mysteriously whisked away. But this isn't necessarily a significant objection to the supernatural theory. It's entirely possible that not all of them were called away at the same time, and those who remained simply moved to different locations and started fresh communities elsewhere. For believers in these traditional accounts, such theories might sound perfectly reasonable as explanations for the mystery of Chaco Canyon. And to be honest, there aren't really many solid objections that completely debunk this social collapse theory. Sure, different sources might add or remove certain details when recounting the events, but generally speaking, the various accounts are remarkably consistent. There was some form of major social collapse involving religious conflicts, possibly including cannibalistic practices, and Chaco Canyon was never the same afterwards. Interestingly, even the most skeptical researchers have been unable to provide a completely reasonable alternative theory to explain the existence of Chaco Canyon and its mysterious abandonment. However, they do think they might be able to explain why the Chacons suddenly disappeared. The problem is, each of these conventional theories has significant holes. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!